Hello and welcome. I'm Debbie Atek. I'm a Bering Straits Native Corporation shareholder and treasurer of the board. If you've been watching these interviews, you've heard me talk about the fact that the Alaska Native corporations are 50 years old, and some of our elders who built the corporations are starting to retire. Last week, I talked to my dad about this subject, and this week, I'm pleased to have someone who represents new leadership, and that's Brad Angasan. Brad is originally from the village of South Naknek in Bristol Bay and is a member of the Kinyuang tribe. When shares were distributed for the corporations, he just missed the cutoff. However, he is a descendant shareholder of Bristol Bay Native Corporation and the Alaska Peninsula Corporation. And he has served in the corporations at the executive management level for 15 years. Currently, Brad has a consulting firm and is also an owner-operator of a fishing vessel that he operates with his wife, Ronalda, continuing his family's 4 generations of commercial fishing. So, Brad, thanks for being here. You've
Pleasure's mine.
you've been just a great sport about coming on here because you've got so many different areas that we've been talking about on this show. So I'm really glad to have you here today. What I thought we would start with the corporations,
Mhm.
like in the opening. So like due to the fact that they're 50 years old, I mean, the people who started them, we talked a little bit um, about how they're starting to retire.
Mhm.
Do you think that the current business models are still um, valid? Is this a good time to be considering like opportunities to change them? Have you been thinking about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that what we have now, the Alaska Native corporations that we have now, completely different business structure than when we first started off. And there are a couple of massive impacts. I think probably the biggest impact to Alaska Native corporations, aside from the Small Business Administration's advent of the 8A ANC program, has really been the evolving landscape of technology and information exchange. You consider how we conducted business 30, 20, maybe even 10 years ago, completely unlike how we conduct business today. And those things have created hyper efficiencies, which have allowed us to master our businesses and really take off in the direction that we're going. And I want to use the Alaska Business Monthly Top 49 as an example of just how successful or how much of an impact Alaska Native corporations have on the Alaska economy. I don't know about you, Debbie, but I was incredibly impressed with the top 10. It blew me away to see 3 village corporations on that list.
This is, and for people who haven't seen, this is a monthly magazine, and every year they have this top 49, the largest 49 largest corporations in Alaska, Alaskan
Yeah.
owned businesses, we should say, because many of them, like the ANCs, operate outside of Alaska. Yeah,
Mhm.
massive growth in village corporations. I was very excited to see that.
Oh, it's incredible. Just village corporations that are breaching into the billion-dollar threshold. I mean, if you think about that, 15 years ago, I remember when my regional corporation broke the billion-dollar threshold. I was completely excited and jazzed. I mean, that was just a whole different universe altogether for us. And now we're generating multiple billions of dollars a year, and to see our village corporations compete in that that general pool there, it's just mind-boggling to me. It's amazing, especially the smaller ones. I mean, if you go
Exactly.
to
So
village, yeah.
so let's talk about that fact that the ANCs, the regionals, primarily started out in the federal contracting space, and then we're seeing the village native corporations get into that space. And there's been some other smaller native corporations that are village owned. Fogneck? No.
Fognak, Chiniga, Fognak, Tutitlik. I mean, all these. I mean, Sitnasak, your village corporation. You broke into the top 49. Chogyong Limited, the village corporation for Dillingham. These corporations have just really begun to master these business models that were created 50 years ago and have evolved them to the next level. They have the best talent, and they're bringing in all the revenue that we see reported today, and it's just amazing to me.
Well, I think I kind of want to jump. topics a little bit because I want to go. It's gonna tie back into what you're talking about. I want to acknowledge your dad, the loss of your father. Huge, huge loss in your community. I'm extend my condolences to you and to your region.
Mhm.
Can you just tell us a little bit about his work and getting the corporation started?
Sure. My dad's time in this whole environment began long before the advent of the act, before the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. He began working for a corporation, which then just sort of evolved into coming into the Bristol Bay Native Corporation. We, as I mentioned to you before, we moved out of the village. I was what, 3 years old when we moved out of South Naknek, 1975, and my journey to Anchorage began there. And really, I tell everybody I had the best of both worlds. I grew up in the village in the summertime and the fall time, and then benefited from the Anchorage School District level of education. My dad, going back to my dad, in addition to working at the Bristol Bay Native Corporation, he was also the chairman of the Alaska Peninsula Corporation when he passed away. And I had the absolute privilege and benefit of spending the last several years working with him as his corporation's president. And I got to
Wow.
tell you, Debbie, my mornings with him began at 6 a.m. every day, and usually began with a text, and if it wasn't a text, it was a phone call, and it was part of the routine. And facing that absence has been just an incredibly difficult thing to adapt to, but we do. And that's why.
I think you are so lucky that you had the opportunity to work with him. And when I was growing up in Nome and then in Anchorage, my dad was an early employee for Bering Straits. He was the first land planner there, and he had a role at Sinasaka at one point too. And so I've had this idea in my mind that I would become involved with the Native corporations, even though I didn't exactly know what they were when I was growing up, because
Mhm.
it was just so like my dad's work and his place in the community, our place in the community. And I don't know, somehow I just was really drawn to it. And I feel like maybe you kind of grew up with the same sort of expectations, like that
Oh.
you were going to go work for the corporation.
I think it was almost just entirely expected of us, that we would be handed the reins, and we would contribute our level of talent and contribution to the work that Native corporations are doing on behalf of our people. It wasn't. I'd say I think, as with most young people, I probably took my role as a shareholder for granted early on. Bear in mind, I wasn't a shareholder until after 1991, after the corporations voted to amend their articles of incorporation to allow second generation shareholders into their corporation's stock base. So anyhow, it wasn't until I'd say a year or two after college that I really began to realize that I have a role here and I have a responsibility. And I went to work for my regional nonprofit organization, Bristol Bay Native Association, and
BBNA.
yeah, I had a great time there. I had some wonderful mentors that really just sort of took me by the hand and told me to march forward, and I did. So my
Well,
journey began there. Is what I'm saying.
so this is the question that I was thinking of a few minutes ago, which is when I talked to my dad last week, I asked him about the priorities that the corporations should have. And for him at that time, and if I asked him today, he might have a different answer, right? But at that moment, he said that the highest priority is to conserve capital, to preserve capital. But I was thinking about I was going to call it your generation, but I think we're actually close to the same age. We're just off by maybe a year or so.
Yeah.
But do you think the younger generations have the same value, or do you think that they preserve preservation of capital is like first and foremost, and then the other things like preserving language and preserving culture or land, land. We haven't talked about how the land holdings are with the corporations. So to me, I was kind of surprised to hear my dad talk about the preservation of capital. I thought he would talk about land ownership is the most important thing. So he and I actually don't agree. I don't know, your region thinks about this in the same way, like are there generational differences in how you guys think about what's the most important?
I think so. I have come into uh, the whole environment with a holistic view. My father's generation, our father's generations, they put so much emphasis on the second generation going out and gaining their higher education. And unfortunately, I think we invested, quite wonderfully in higher education for our shareholders. But at the same time, we didn't really create any vehicles for them to come back and apply that knowledge to the village. So we have a gap there. I think as regional corporations, native corporations in general, as they become more successful, they have a responsibility to take up more social objective. Absolutely. Do I think it requires change? I don't know, maybe internally. See, I'm all about self-determination and exercising our native will, so to speak. And I firmly believe in those principles thereof. So I think if change were to occur, it's got to occur internally.
You have some really interesting people in your neck of the woods. And I think for people who aren't familiar with Alaskan geography, I think most people who might be watching this, they're in Alaska, right? So they're like, we all know this. But for people who are outside of Alaska, they may not know. Like me coming from the Northwest and you coming from the Southwest, it's far apart. And where our cultures are connected at some point, like maybe 5,000 years back. So we have some root words in our languages where we share some root words, but we've developed into two separate cultures, very distinct cultures. So I like talking to people from different regions to hear about worldviews and how people are considering the same, because we all inherited the same structure with this INCSA Act, right? So it's like, here you go, 13 regions, 13 different groups of people. And then, of course, there's much more diversity within those 13 or 12, I should say now, than just the 12, because they, like, especially in the interior, right? They just threw in a bunch of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of categories of people and where they live, one of the things that I think about as somebody who's looking forward to, like, what are the corporations going to do next? What do we need to do for keeping them healthy in perpetuity? I think a lot about how to engage the next generation, or generations plural. People who are, if you watch my interview with my dad, he goes off on a tangent about handheld devices. And he's like, if we're not careful, our kids are just going to do whatever marketing tells them to do, which, yeah, he kind of has a point. So if we, as shareholders or leaders of Alaska Native corporations, are up here or up there in Alaska, trying to reach our shareholders in Kansas or San Francisco or Oregon, how do we reach them? What do they need to know? Like, for business purposes, we have to have quorum, but that's like a Western mindset. I'm
Totally.
thinking, don't let the Western mindset of how corporations operate dominate what is most important, which is, how do we make sure those kids, and at this point, people our age, feel some connection to these corporations, because these are your birthright, or our birthrights, having a share in this corporation. My corporation only gifts non-original shareholders to lineal descendants at this point. We haven't opened up enrollment, but I know some have. So, like, this is kind of a big deal. So I just wanted to see what your thoughts were about, do you think it's as important as I'm making it out to be?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like Chicken Little?
absolutely do. It's always sort of it's really hard not to be critical about that because we want to be as positive and supportive of our regional entities as we possibly can. But within that same respect, that's sort of a shortcoming um, of being part of an Alaska Native Corporation. That degree of communication that fails to make that intrinsic bond with shareholders who no longer have a tie or connection to the land, or if they do, it's multiple generations out. Um, when I was president of Alaska Peninsula Corporation, we had shareholders that ranged from Paris, France, all the way to different parts of Newfoundland, Canada. It was crazy. That to me, that's just uh, amazingly indicative of the diversity of where our people have evolved to away from their ancestral lands into areas like yourself in New York City. Myself, living in Anchorage, Alaska, from the village, I have a life stream of being able to go back to the village and build my home there and die there. And I don't know if I'll ever accomplish it. Everything is so bound to the way that we conduct business, and my business in particular is really focused on generating capacity for small native-owned business. I work a lot with village corporations that are developing and that are trying to make that next step of advancement, and that's where my focus is.
Well,
So
let's.
yeah, go ahead.
So yes, I didn't mean to cut you off. So yes, it is very important.
Very important.
I mean, I really editorialized that, but this isn't a news show, right? Um, but you began. I jumped in because you started to talk about your work, and I want to make sure that we talk about your consulting that you do. And I I'm particularly interested in what you were just saying about helping Native-owned businesses to develop capacity. Are you doing anything that ties into the infrastructure funding that's coming into the state? Because I feel like this it's like not just once in a generation. This is like we haven't seen anything this big since the Works Act, right, during Eisenhower. So I feel like we gotta get out there and get our smaller native corporations, our business owners, small business owners, to be thinking about how to take advantage of the economic opportunity that's in front of us, to have them get some ideas. So I'm really glad that you're here, that you're working as a consultant, that you have the background that you do with working with your regional corporation and your village corporation. So having said all of that, I would love to hear you say what you were about to say, which is, it sounds like we need to build capacity.
Absolutely, and that's I find that in the work that we do, we're working more and more with not just small business, but with tribal and even municipal organizations that recognize that there's an opportunity, a massive opportunity presented by the bipartisan infrastructure law that's sunk billions of dollars into our state. And absolutely, yes, agree that it presents significant opportunity for the organization or small business that's prepared to meet the demand that's generated by it. With that, I exercise caution here because there are a number of outside firms that have made their way into Alaska and have identified Alaska as a market space, and are competing for those broadband resources and those climate resilience resources that have generated so many opportunities for not just individual business, but entire communities and regions. I look at how the broadband resources have been awarded through the NTIA, and I struggle with it because initially, when the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program was announced, I saw this as a massive, significant game changer for our people. I mean, this is as if the government's come in and said, "Here's money to build a road." It's an information road. It's an information highway that potentially have impact on private enterprise, on how government is managed, all the way down telehealth, medicine, public safety, all of that. I mean, all those things are so dependent on information these days, information technology, that it's never going to go away. It's always going to be there. Now that technologies may change, but the need for information technology itself will always be there, and that is the target industry right there, I think.
So you started to talk about how there are some large corporations that are coming in, and that I think I had some similar thoughts when I first heard about the NTIA funding. I thought, oh, this is a game changer. We've needed this not only in Alaska, but in rural, the lower 48 and rural communities. People who live in rural communities need to have the opportunity to connect to the internet at the same rate that everybody else does in order to be competitive. But then my second thought was, for at least for Alaska, is, oh, this is going to be a massive wealth transfer for the people who are already, not people, but corporations that are in position to be able to start immediately rolling out, like laying cable or building towers. So this is where I had started this series of interviews back in during the shutdown, but now I restarted it because I just keep thinking, like, granted, there's going to be these large corporations that come in, but there has to be a way for our smaller individually owned businesses or Alaska Native owned businesses to participate side by side. Like, all of this economic opportunity, I guess, could conceivably go to all outside firms, but some of it's going to stay in state. And but we have to build capacity, and that goes back to what you were talking about. So can you talk a little bit more about, like, maybe projects that you're doing that are related to this? Is it broadband, or is it construction, or?
No, right now, Far North Strategies provides consulting services to a consortium of 8 villages, tribal governments, and we are directly involved with the rollout of that grant for those villages. Right now, we are in the rescoping mode. Initially, when we submitted our application 2 years ago to NTIA, that's how long it took, 2 years. It was a totally different scope of work that we had proposed. And now, because of overlap and competition with other consortiums, confusion amongst the other consortiums about village participation and membership into the consortiums, we lost a significant amount of our villages to that overlap. We went from 17 villages to 8, and just overnight, which was a massive reduction in what we had originally proposed. So those are difficulties that we are wading through. We now know that we know. And we've all drawn our lines in the sand. We know our territories, and hopefully everybody stays in their swim lane, and doesn't cross over the threshold and try to steal. I call it stealing, because that's exactly what it is. When you agree to go to work or work with a tribal organization, and they're swayed away by another vendor, an outside vendor, then that's sort of a travesty. I work for a consortium that is Alaska based. It's 50 years old. It's as old as our regional corporations, and it's because of that anchor, so to speak, and that establishment, that we chose to work for them versus, say, an out-of-state firm. My wife Ronalda, she's heavily into grant writing. And she had been approached several times from a couple of different outside groups trying to get her to go to work for them, but she chose not to. She wanted her work to remain here in Alaska, for Alaska Native people. Yeah.
Well, that I admire both of you. I admire the fact that you work together. I always like seeing the photos she puts up of your boat when you guys are getting ready to begin fishing season. So you'll have to tell her I said hi if she's watching. Cool. Hi. And I couldn't agree with you more that I would hope that the tribes would go with a tribal consortium
Mhm.
rather than an outside firm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Debbie, there's so much opportunity here on many different levels, from the municipal to the tribal to the small business level, private enterprise. It's really about determining a niche and figuring out what you can contribute to target those resources. And that's what we do. We help optimize those decision-making purposes for small business and tribal organizations. We develop strategies to help them compete, and that's where we're at, and that's what we work on. And
I love it. If you want to
go
just close it, I think we're getting close to the end of the half hour. We try to keep these to 30 minutes. So if people are watching during lunch, they can do this and still eat lunch.
Yeah.
But if you are mid thought.
Um, you know, I just wanted to share really quickly that, when I left executive management at my village corporation where I worked, I had 15-year history there, and I served as its president for the last 3 years prior to my departure. I took everything that I loved about my job and created Far North Strategies with my wife. By the way, Far North Strategies, 51% woman-owned small business. Renata is my partner, and she keeps me in line. So, yeah.
Well, that was definitely worth staying. That's
Thank
important
you.
to know. But
Yeah.
but in all seriousness, this is one of the things that I'm really happy to hear about, because I want to hear more stories about how our Alaska Native corporations are preparing people to go out and to be involved in business and the economy, or to rise up and be able to be competitive at high levels. And you have executive skills and an executive resume, so you should be you should be able to transfer those to any corporation. Although I'm glad that you're working in Alaska with the village corporations and with the tribes and the municipalities that you're working with, because they definitely need it. We talked about the lack of capacity, and so I'm glad that there are firms like yours and Ronaldo's that are there to help. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. The pleasure was mine.
Nice talking to you. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks, Debbie.
Bye.